Namaste. In the series about books and books that I found fascinating or interesting, I want to introduce one book to you, which is after reading the book, it's very difficult to get those thoughts out of your mind. It's not fiction, but it almost reads like fiction. So it's a book called The Song of the Cell. Some of you might have heard about it, and it is by an author called Siddhartha Mukherjee. So here is what. Yeah. So this is what the book is. Okay. So what I found fascinating about this book is, of course, it's a pretty big book, and I think it's about 500 pages or so. But what is this book about? It is the song of the cell. The cell is the cell that every living being is made of. And what I found fascinating about this book is the way Siddhartha Mukherjee actually goes about introducing this little ingredient which is underlying every living thing in the world. So the first point was, when did people start realizing that we are made of cells, and these cells are quite similar in the animals, in the plants, and in all of these living things? That similar cells. I mean, if you remember your biology lessons, you would have remembered the structure of a cell, the nucleus, the mitochondria, the ribosomes, and all that element. And this same cell architecture is driving every living thing. And it took a long time from the time people started exploring these things to get this accepted. So there was one part of it which was very, very saddening, because so many people who've been, persecuted and attacked for proposing something like this, that we are made of all of this. So that is the initial part of how did this idea actually came into getting accepted, that it is a cell that is actually a common cell structure which is actually defining all the living things. And from then on, we start moving into understanding what this means. Okay, so the fascinating part was to realize that the body consists of possibly billions or trillions of these cells, and the complexity associated with each of these cells, the level of processing that gets involved, the structural details of that, and how the hereditary information is captured in every cell of your body, and how the cell is able to make use of that genetic DNA information to decide its process. And also, what sort of got me very very excited was to realize that every cell in your body is actually independent of every other cell in your body. So the cell here doesn't even know that it is there is another finger here, or this is part of a hand, or this is part of this. That cell has an independent life, possibly guided only by the DNA that it has, and of course, maybe what comes in the blood and the influence of that, all that might be there. But this cell has no idea about what is there, so there is no. It is not like my brain is telling every cell that you do this, you do this. So even the brain itself is are cells like that. So how does all these cells in the brain kind of work together and become brain? And the science in there are different types of cells in terms of structurally or otherwise, for your bones, your muscles, your heart, your lungs, liver, intestines, your skin. All of these are formed by similar that broader concept of cells with maybe how they reproduce, or how they repair themselves. All of these may vary, but the common cell structure and the fact that we are basically like a massively distributed system with really no central control. Okay, and the central control is because something in the bloodstream, or some the nerves actually is triggering something in my brain. The brain produces some chemical, and that chemical goes all to appropriate place, and that triggers some action. So there is no quote unquote conscious control that, okay, my finger has got a wound, and I must do something like that. All this is happening autonomously, independently, managed by this. There is even more fascinating things. For example, how a human being or any animal is born. You are born from a single cell, and that cell is the zygote, or whatever, the sperm, and this thing that becomes a single cell. That cell reproduces, and it just doesn't simply reproduce, right? So as it reproduces, it decides to, maybe something will start becoming the heart, something will become the digestive system, some cells will become the skin, some cells will become the bone. So how does that initial single cell kind of eventually span out and produce all these different varieties of cells? When does it begin to happen? When does it end? And also it's that from that cell only your brain cells are getting produced. And look at something like your heart, which even has a moving part in it. So how does the heartbeats actually get produced from that same kind of passive cell? So all of that aspects, how did people come to realize those things? And we still don't know a lot about all of these things that is happening in your body, how your immune system works, okay, and what is the role of the cell there, and how diseases happen. For example, how does cancer get formed or cured? And that too, again, the view is from the cell. Okay, so that's the beauty of it, that the entire book is talking from the view from the cell. So there is not that much of a macroscopic view. We are looking everything from the cell. How does a cell recognize? So every cell need to understand what it needs to understand, and should know how to respond to what affects it. And every cell is also a living thing by itself, because it does some processing, it produces weight, it requires energy, it has energy storage, and and all the control mechanism. So I find that the exposition, the detailing that it does through a story, right? And you see a lots of scientists that whom we have read about in our school textbooks. They all come alive and knit together the story from the early conception of a cell being the fundamental mechanism to understand how all these questions are being posed, how we are trying to decode those to understand the answer to these questions, like how does repair mechanisms work, and how does reproduction or the duplication of the cells versus repairing of cells which are getting damaged. So there is so much nuances in you from a cell perspective. And then he moves on to control. If you change the DNA, potentially these behaviors can be controlled. So that is cell engineering, and he moves on to that aspect and say that has a lot of challenges, because if you change one amino acid or the ACTG in the DNA, it may affect multiple aspects. So the same element of the DNA might be affecting your eye and might also change your influence your heart and maybe other parts. So you can't control individually, but still, if you could do something like that, maybe you can actually reverse or control some of these big diseases that is threatening human, right? So this entire book is a very fascinating journey of all this, and the way Siddhartha actually talks about when he introduces these concepts and talks about it is simply amazing. It is one of the book which I religiously read from the beginning to the end, and it's very difficult to get out of that thinking that it brings in. So something that I would recommend all of you to do. It gives you a different way of looking at your own existence or your own system. Okay, so do take a look.